The rangefinder was already in her hand when the master gunner told the room she'd never make the shot. And Dana Poole didn't look up from cleaning her sights to hear it. That's the thing people always got wrong about her. They watched her stay quiet and decided quiet meant scared or slow or unsure of herself. Around her, the ready room at the fire base went loud, the way it always went loud before a live problem. 40 voices talking over each other, boots on plywood, somebody's radio, hissing static in the corner. And in the middle of it, she sat on an ammo crate with a bore brush and a rag, running the brush down the barrel of her rifle in long, even strokes. Unhurried, like a woman waxing a floor she'd waxed 1,000 times. Marcus Vane stood by the big map with a laser pointer and a crowd around him, and he was the loudest thing in the room. Broad through the shoulders, loud in a way that filled a space and pushed other people to its edges. He was good. Everybody knew he was good. He had the range records on the plywood board by the door, with his name at the top of them, in grease pencil, and he liked people to know it. 1,200 meters crosswind, target behind hard cover, he was saying, and he swept the pointer across the ridgeline on the map. You need somebody who can do that in their sleep. You don't send somebody who's here to fill a slot. He didn't say her name. He didn't have to. He tipped his head a half-inch toward the ammo crate, and a couple of the newer men grinned, and Dana ran the brush down the barrel one more time and set it aside. She checked the rangefinder's battery, thumbed it on, thumbed it off, set it in the pouch on her chest where it lived. Nobody watching her would have known that she'd already decided something about the ridge on the map, and that she was right, and that in about 30 hours, 400 men were going to watch her do the exact opposite of miss. Before we get into it, if stories about the person nobody counted on doing the thing nobody else could do are why you're here, subscribe, and tell me in the comments what city you're listening from. Stay to the end, because there is a moment coming where this woman walks out of a burning motor pool, carrying a man twice her size across her back, and you are going to want to see how she got there. Now, back to the crate. The fire base sat in the dry mountains, where the air was thin and the rock came up through the dirt, like the bones of something old, brown all the way to a brown horizon, no green in it anywhere. It was called Outpost Keel, and it hung off the side of a valley the way a nest hangs off a cliff. And the wind came up that valley every afternoon like clockwork and made everybody's eyes gritty. Dana had been there 6 weeks. In 6 weeks, she had said maybe 200 words that weren't about work. She'd learned to shoot from her grandfather, and her grandfather had never fired a rifle in anger in his life. He'd been a stonemason. He built dry walls, the kind with no mortar, the kind that hold up a hillside for 200 years on nothing but the weight of the stones against each other, and the way a man chooses to set them. She'd spent every summer of her childhood on a hillside in the heat handing him rocks, and he'd take each one and turn it over in his hands and find the one face of it that wanted to sit against the last stone, and he'd set it there, and it would never move again. You don't force a stone, Dana, he'd tell her, not looking up, his hands doing the seeing for him. You find where it already wants to go. Then all you're doing is letting it. He said it 100 times over 100 summers. She'd hated the slowness of it as a girl. She had wanted to build the wall fast and see it stand. And he would take the rock out of her hands when she rushed and set it down and make her wait. And he'd say it again, quieter. Find where it wants to go, then let it. She hadn't understood back then that he was teaching her the only thing she would ever be truly good at. That a shot, like a stone, had a place it already wanted to be. And that all the wind and the drop and the spin of the earth were just the shape of the ground you had to set it into. And if you fought them, you lost, and if you read them, you won. There was a letter in the bottom of her ruck she hadn't answered. Her grandfather was 86 now, and his hands had started to shake, and he dictated the letter to her aunt because he couldn't hold a pen steady anymore. And the letter asked her to come home and help him take down the old wall behind the house before it fell on somebody, because he couldn't do it himself, and he didn't trust anybody else to do it right. He wanted to teach her the taking down the way he'd taught her the building up. It had sat in her ruck for 3 weeks. She could have answered it in 5 minutes. Every night she took it out and read the first line and put it back, because answering it meant admitting he was old, and that his hands were done, and that the summers were over, and she could kill a man at a mile, but she could not make herself write 4 sentences to an old man who loved her. She got up off the crate, slung the rifle. The room didn't notice her go, mostly, but a young corporal named Tess Ruiz noticed, because Ruiz noticed everything and understood almost none of it yet. Ruiz was new, a driver and a radio operator, 19 and eager, and terrified of doing the wrong thing in front of the wrong person. She watched Dana walk to the door, and she watched Dana stop at the plywood board with Vane's records on it, and she watched Dana read them without any expression at all. And then Dana reached up and straightened the board where it hung crooked on its nail, squared it level with 2 fingers, and walked out. And Ruiz didn't know why that stuck in her head. A woman straightening a board, but it stuck. The next morning, Vane made her prove herself, which is to say, he made a show of it. There was a steel plate set out at 800 meters on the range they used, and he called her out in front of the morning formation, loud, friendly in the way that isn't friendly at all. "Poole, you've been awful quiet about your marksmanship. Show us. 800, cold bore, first round." He grinned around at the men. No pressure." The wind was coming up the valley already, gusting, the kind of wind that makes lesser shooters give up and go to lunch. Dana lay down behind the rifle without a word. She didn't glass the target for 5 minutes the way Vane did. She lay there, and she felt the wind on the left side of her neck, felt it drop, felt it come back, and she waited, not for the wind to stop, because it wasn't going to stop, but for the particular half-second inside the gusts, when the push was steady and known. Her grandfather's hands turning a stone. Find where it wants to go. She let the shot go into a lull she'd felt coming before it came, and the plate rang at 800 meters a full second later, a clear flat bell across the valley, and the formation went quiet. Vane said, "Lucky." But something moved behind his eyes and didn't move back. Later that day, she was easy to be around, which surprised the men who'd only seen her quiet. A generator had died in the heat, and 3 guys were sweating over it, swearing. And Dana crouched down, listened to it turn over, and said, "It's not the starter. Listen to it. It's fuel. Somebody put the wrong line back on the filter." She was right. And when the youngest of them, embarrassed, admitted he'd been the one who serviced it, she didn't ride him. She said, First time I rebuilt a carburetor. I put it back together with a part left over. Whole thing ran for a week with a spring rattling around inside it. You'll be fine. And they laughed, and she laughed. And for 20 minutes, she told them stories about the worst engines she'd ever wrecked. And the youngest one decided he'd walk through fire for her, and didn't know how to say so. That was the same afternoon. A supply sergeant named Webb Kessler watched her do a small thing he couldn't stop thinking about. She was helping stack ammunition cans, and the stack was going up crooked, and the men were forcing the cans, banging them into place. Dana didn't. She picked up each can and set it down, and each one she set down settled the stack instead of fighting it. And in about 90 seconds, the crooked stack she'd walked up to was plumb and square and solid, and she hadn't seemed to hurry once. Kessler stood there with a clipboard and watched a woman half his size make a ton of steel sit right by touching it gently. And he opened his mouth to say something and closed it because he didn't have the words. It looked like she was listening to the metal. He'd think about it for the rest of his life. The thing broke open 2 days later, in the middle of the afternoon, and it didn't come as a radio call. It came as a smell. Dana was cleaning her rifle again. She was always cleaning her rifle, when the wind shifted and brought the smell of diesel smoke down the valley. Wrong, too much of it. And half a second later, the whole outpost felt the thud of it come up through the ground. The motor pool at the near end of the valley floor, the fuel and vehicle yard that supplied keel and 2 positions past it, had gone up. Not an accident. A coordinated hit at the choke point, mortars first to crack it open, and fighters moving in behind to finish it and hold it. Because whoever held that motor pool held the road, and whoever held the road had keel by the throat. There were 9 men down there. Fuelers, mechanics, a supply detail. 9. And the number went around the outpost fast and ugly, because the motor pool sat under a rock shelf that Keel's guns couldn't reach, tucked into a dead angle. And there were fighters already in the wire, and more coming. And the 9 men were pinned in a maintenance bay, with the fuel bladders burning 50 feet away, and no way out and no angle for anyone to help them. 9. That was the number. 9 men had to come home. The outpost commander was a colonel named Bennett Hale, and Hale had let Vane run his mouth for 6 weeks, because Vane's records were real, and Vane won things. Hale stood at the operations table, looking at a map that told him there was no shot into that maintenance bay's approach. No gun on keel that could reach the fighters closing on those 9 men, because the rock shelf ate every angle he had. And then he looked up and found Dana Poole, already standing in the doorway with her rifle, because she'd already read the map in her head from 6 weeks of staring at that valley, and she was waiting for him to understand what she already knew. Poole? Hale's voice caught. He was a proud man, and what he said next cost him. I told the staff you were an augmentee filling a line number. I read your file in about 4 seconds, and I put you on the range roster and forgot your name. I was wrong about you, and I'm going to find out how wrong right now, because you're the only shooter on this hill who's ever hit anything in that valley wind, and those 9 men don't have anybody else. He swallowed. Can you get an angle? Give me the high Sangar on the east horn, she said, and Ruiz to drive me up. I've had the angle for 6 weeks. Nobody asked. Her first words on the net, 30 seconds later, going up the hill in a truck that Ruiz drove like she was trying to break it, were flat and even and carried none of the fear that was actually sitting in Dana's chest like a stone. "Keel, Pool, moving to the east horn. Tell those 9 men to hold and keep their heads down. I'm coming to them." No panic, no swagger, just a woman telling 9 strangers she was on her way, in a voice you'd trust with your life. The East Horn was a spur of rock that stuck out of the valley side at maybe 1,400 meters from the motor pool, higher, with a crumbling old sandbagged fighting position on top of it that nobody had used in a year. Ruiz drove them up a goat track that was never meant for a truck, the vehicle bucking and sliding, rocks banging up under the floor. And the whole time Dana was watching the valley open up below her and doing the math her grandfather had put in her hands. Because here was the problem, and it was worse than distance. The fighters closing on the maintenance bay weren't in the open. They were moving up a covered approach, a dry drainage ditch that ran along the base of the rock shelf, and the shelf overhung it. From keel, from anywhere on the valley floor, you couldn't see into that ditch, and you couldn't shoot into it. It was the perfect covered route, and whoever had planned this hit had planned it around that ditch. From the East Horn, high and to the side, she could see down into part of it, but only part. There was a section, the last 40 meters before the fighters would reach the bay, where the overhang of the shelf hid the ditch completely, even from her angle. They'd go into that dead section, and they'd come out of it right on top of the 9 men, and she'd have no shot for the whole last stretch, the stretch that mattered most. She set up on the horn with the old sandbags in front of her and got her first look through the scope, and the fear came up hard and real. She could see the burning fuel bladders throwing black smoke 100 feet in the air. She could see the maintenance bay, a low concrete block building with a corrugated roof, and she could see the muzzle flashes stitching against its walls. She could see the ditch, and she could see, moving up it in 2s and 3s, the fighters. She counted them without meaning to. 11 that she could see. Maybe more behind. And every one of them was walking towards the point where the overhang would swallow them and take them out of her sight. "Pool, keel." Hale's voice. "What have you got?" "I've got most of the ditch," she said. "There's a dead section at the end I can't see into, 40 meters. Once they're in it, I'm blind. And that's the 40 meters where they reach our people." She was already working it as she spoke, her eye going along the rock shelf, along the overhang, looking for the thing her grandfather had taught her to look for. Not the obstacle, but the place the obstacle already wanted to give. "Stand by." She stopped the fighters she could see first, because that was the part that was only hard, not impossible. This is the part that got 150 seconds of her life, and felt like an hour. She found the lead 2 in the open stretch of the ditch, 1,400 meters out, the wind coming up the valley from her left and gusting, the smoke from the fuel fire tearing sideways across her field of view and then thinning, the burning diesel stink of it, all the way up on the horn, the rifle warm against her cheek. She didn't wait for the smoke to clear. She'd stopped waiting for conditions to be good a long time ago. She felt the wind on her neck, felt the lull coming the way she'd felt it on the range, found where the shot already wanted to go, and let it go. 1,400 meters away, a man in the ditch went down, and a full second and a half after that, The crack of it rolled back up to keel, and the men on the wall heard it and started to hope. She worked the ditch. One, then another, then two more, who bunched up when they realized somebody was reaching into their covered route from an angle they hadn't planned for. Each shot was the same slow certainty. The wind, the lull, the place the round wanted to sit. Down below, the fighters started to break for the dead section. The 40 meters of overhang where she couldn't follow, because they'd figured out that was the one place she couldn't touch them. 7 left that she could count. Then 5. They were running for the blind spot now, and once they were in it, they'd be on the 9 men in under a minute, and there was not one thing anybody on that hill could do about it. "Poole, they're going to that dead ground," Hale said, and his voice had the flat, calm men get when they've accepted something terrible. "You can't see it, neither can we." And here is where she did the thing. "Kill, Poole, get me Kessler, the supply sergeant, right now." Because Webb Kessler knew what was stored in that motor pool, and Dana had spent 6 weeks memorizing that valley, and she had just remembered the one thing about the rock shelf that its overhang couldn't hide. Kessler came up on the net, breathing hard. "Kessler, listen to me," Dana said. And now she was talking slow, the way her grandfather talked when it mattered, because a listener 2 miles away with the fear on him needs it slow. "That maintenance bay. The overhang comes off the shelf right above the dead section of the ditch. What's stacked along the base of that shelf, under the overhang? You inventoried it. Tell me." "Compressed gas," Kessler said. "Acetylene and oxygen cylinders. The welding stock, a whole rack of them staged against the rock face, because there was no room inside. Poole, why, how many, and how high do they stack?" 40, 50 cylinders, chest high, chained to a rail." She was already on it. She could not see the fighters in the dead section, but she could see the top of that overhanging rock shelf, and she could see, catching the afternoon sun, the very tops of the cylinder rack, sticking up above the lip of the overhang, the only part of that whole staging area that stuck up into her line of sight. A row of steel caps in a line, chest-high cylinders under high-pressure gas. Sitting directly against the rock wall of the ditch the fighters were running through right now. Her grandfather never forced a stone. He found the one face of it that wanted to go, and he let it. The overhang hid the men, but the overhang could not hide what was leaning against the top of it. She didn't have to see the fighters. She had to hit the thing standing over them, and let the rock and the pressure and the narrow throat of that ditch do what she couldn't do herself. "Kessler, if I put a round into an oxygen cylinder in that rack, high into the valve stack, what happens to a man standing at the base of the shelf 10 feet under it?" A pause. Then quietly, understanding, "It comes off the rail, all of it. High pressure, and the whole rack comes down into the ditch, and there's nowhere in that dead ground for it to go but down onto whoever's in it. And it'll cook off. Poole. It'll take the whole dead section." "That's what I've got," she said. "That's the angle. Tell Colonel Hale I'm taking a shot he can't see the target of, and I need him to trust me for about 10 seconds. She lined up on the row of steel caps sticking up over the lip of the overhang. 1,300 meters now, the sun on them, the wind up the valley from her left. This was the hardest thing she had ever done, and she made herself slow. She had to hit a specific cylinder, high in its valve, at 1,300 meters, across a gusting valley wind, and she would not see the result. She would only hear it, and either 9 men lived or they didn't. And there was no second try, because after the first round, every fighter in that ditch would sprint the last 20 meters and it would be over. Find where it wants to go, then let it. She felt the wind on her neck. She waited for the lull she knew was coming, the steady half-second inside the gust. And it came the way it always came. And in that half-second, she stopped being afraid and became the thing her grandfather had made on a hillside over 20 summers. And she let the round go. It traveled 1,300 meters. The wait was the longest second and a half of 400 men's lives. Nothing happened. The round was in the air, and the world held still, and on the wall at Kiel, nobody breathed. The rack came off the rail. They heard the cylinder go first, a hard, flat crack, and then the whole staged rack of compressed gas tore off its chain and came down off the lip of the overhang into the narrow throat of the ditch. And then it cooked off all at once in a rolling white roar that walked the length of the dead section and had nowhere to climb but into the covered ground where 5 men were running, and the overhang that had hidden them from Dana's rifle became the lid on the thing that finished them. The sound reached the horn a beat later, a long tearing boom that rolled up the valley and off the far wall and came back again. The ditch went quiet. The covered approach was gone. "Keel, Pool." Her voice on the net was flat as a table. "Ditch is closed. No movers on the approach. Get a relief element down to that maintenance bay. The 9 are clear to move." A breath. "Motor pool's still burning. Tell them to come out the south side, away from the fuel." But the 9 weren't all going to walk out, because as the relief truck ground down the valley, a mechanic named Saul Draper came up on the net from inside the bay, and he was hurt, his leg pinned under a fallen roof beam when the mortars had cracked the building, and he couldn't move, and the fire from the fuel bladders had reached the near wall of the bay and was coming through. The other 8 could get out the south side. Draper couldn't. And the relief element was still 4 minutes out. Dana was already up. "Ruiz, drive." She came down off the horn with her hands that had just done the hardest shot of her life, and she went to do a thing that was not shooting at all. Ruiz drove them down the goat track faster than they'd come up it, into the valley floor, into the black smoke and the heat that hit like a wall past the 8 men staggering out of the south side coughing. And Dana was out of the truck before it stopped and running into the burning motor pool with a rag over her face. The bay was full of smoke, and the fire was in the roof now. Draper was on the floor, a big man, a head taller than her, and half again as heavy, his leg under a steel beam that had come down off the wall. He was conscious. His face was gray. "Leave it," he said. "You can't move that. Leave it. Get out." "Not leaving," Dana said, and she got down beside him, and she did not try to lift the beam, because she was small, and the beam weighed 600 pounds, and force was not the answer. Force was never the answer. Her grandfather had never once in his life lifted a stone he could lever instead. She found a length of steel pipe in the wreckage, and she found a chunk of engine block for a fulcrum, and she set the pipe under the beam and the block under the pipe, close to the load the way he'd taught her, and she put her whole small weight on the long end, and the beam that she could never have lifted came up 2 inches, and Draper dragged his leg free. "Can you walk?" "No." So she got him across her back, a man twice her size, dead weight, his arms over her shoulders and her legs driving up out of a crouch the way you lift a stone. You've got no business lifting. From the ground, from the legs, letting the bones do the work and not the arms. And she walked him out. Out through the smoke, out through the heat, out the south side of the burning motor pool, with Saul Draper across her back and her jaw set and her eyes streaming. 400 men on the walls of Kiel watching a woman they'd written off carry a man twice her size out of a fire that should have killed them both. She got him to the truck. She laid him down in the bed of it. And only then, with the fire at her back, did she brace her hands on the tailgate and let herself breathe. "You asked if you'd live," she said to Draper, because he had, back on the floor, in the smoke. "You're going to live. That's not a hope. That's a fact." Draper had a daughter's wedding to walk into in the spring? No. Draper had a boat, a half-built wooden boat, in a garage back home that he'd been building for 11 years, plank by plank, that he talked about to anyone who'd listen, that he swore he'd finish and put in the water before he was too old to sail it. He grabbed her wrist as she laid him down, and he couldn't get any words out. And she said, "You're going to finish the boat, Saul. Hold on to that. You hear me? You're going to put it in the water." That was the number closed. 9 had to come home, and 9 came home. She didn't say it. Ruiz said it, from the driver's seat, in a voice that shook. "That's 9. That's all 9. And she put her head down on the steering wheel and cried, and nobody told her to stop. She reported it done the way you'd report a delivery. Keel, pool, one times casualty extracted from the maintenance bay, non-ambulatory, stable, moving to the aid station now. Approach is clear. That's all personnel accounted for. Pool out. Not one word in it about the fire, or the beam, or the weight of a man on her back, or the shot she'd made blind at a target she never saw. Just the facts in a flat voice, and the flatness of it against what had actually happened was the loudest thing anybody heard all day. And nobody said a word about it because there was nothing to say. It was in the aid station an hour later that her hands finally started to shake. She was standing against the wall watching the medics work on Draper's leg, and she looked down, and her hands were going like leaves, and she put them in her armpits and pressed them flat against her body and stood very still and waited for it to pass. And it didn't pass for a long time. Ruiz came and stood next to her, not saying anything, and after a while, Ruiz reached over and just held on to Dana's sleeve, the way you hold on to something in the dark, and Dana let her. The Army sent a man to check the record against the person, because the record didn't make sense to anyone who read it. His name was Grant Foley, a review officer from the brigade, sent up to Kiel 2 days later to reconcile the after-action report, and he sat across a plywood table from Dana Poole with a folder open in front of him and a look on his face like a man doing arithmetic that won't come out. "I want to walk through this," Foley said. "You engaged 11 personnel at ranges out to 1,400 meters in a valley crosswind, cold bore, under time pressure, and then you made a shot at a compressed gas rack you could see the top of, at 1,300, to collapse a covered approach you could not observe, based on a supply inventory relayed over the radio." He looked up. The last shooter, who claimed something like that in a report, I had reduced in grade for falsifying it. So you understand why I'm here. "I understand," Dana said. "Your file says augmentee. Range roster. No advanced marksmanship school. No competition record. He turned a page. Where does a person learn to do what you did, if not in any school the Army has a record of? My grandfather, she said. He built stone walls. Dry stone, no mortar. You don't force a stone. You find where it already wants to go, and then you let it. A shot's the same. The wind and the drop and the spin are just the shape of the ground. You don't fight them. You read them, and you set the round where it already wants to sit. She said it plainly, without any drama in it, because it was just true. The rack was chest high against the rock. The ditch had one narrow throat. I couldn't see the men, but I could see the thing that would come down on top of them if I hit it right. So I hit it right. Foley looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked down at the folder, and he closed it slowly, and he said, Kessler already walked me through the inventory. The blast pattern in the ditch matches. 8 witnesses on the wall watched the tracer of the last round go over the overhang. He rubbed his face. I came up here to catch a liar. I'm going to go back down and write the truth, which is worse, because now I have to explain to a room full of colonels how the augmentee filling a line number is the best rifle in this brigade, and nobody knew it. He stood. He put out his hand. I'm sorry for what I assumed walking in here. That doesn't happen to me often. Right, it happened. That night she couldn't sleep, and neither could Draper, and they ended up out behind the aid station in the dark. Him in a wheelchair, with his splinted leg out in front of him, her sitting on an empty water can, and the two of them talked the way people talk when they've been through the same fire and can't sleep it off. They're going to give you something for this, Draper said. A medal, big one, probably. Probably. You don't sound like a person who wants one. She was quiet for a while. The generators hummed somewhere behind them. And then she said the thing she hadn't said to anybody. The thing that had been sitting in the bottom of her ruck for 3 weeks. I've got a letter from my grandfather I haven't answered. He's 86. His hands are shaking now. He can't hold a pen. My aunt wrote it out for him. He asked me to come home and help him take down the old wall behind the house before it falls on somebody, because he can't do it and he won't let anybody else do it wrong. She turned the water can under her a quarter turn, restless. Everything I did out there on that horn, I did with his hands. And I can kill a man at 1,400 meters, and I cannot make myself write 4 sentences back to an old man who taught me every single thing I know. Because if I write it, then it's true that the summers are over. And I would rather be a coward about a letter than admit that. Draper let the dark sit for a second. Then he said, You know what you just told me? You told me you'd rather he stayed exactly like he is in your head, young and strong on that hill, than right back and find out he's old. That's not protecting him. That's protecting you. He shifted his leg. My old man died while I was on my first deployment. I kept telling myself I'd call when I got back. I'd have the time then. We'd fix it then. There was no then, Poole. There's only ever now, and now, and now, until there isn't. He looked at her. You made a shot today. You couldn't see the end of, and you trusted it anyway. Write the letter you can't see the end of. Trust it the same way. She didn't answer him, but something in her chest moved that hadn't moved in 3 weeks. The letter got answered, and nobody handed her the answer. She just decided. She sat down 2 mornings later at the plywood table with a pen and the back of a ration box for scratch paper, and she started it 4 times, And the first 3 times she wrote around it, and the 4th time she stopped writing around it. She didn't need anybody to tell her what to say. She'd known the whole time. That was the thing about the wall she'd been avoiding. Taking a wall down is the same skill as building it up. You go stone by stone. You find the one that's carrying the load, and you take the weight off it slow. And you have to be there. Your hands on it. You can't do it from 2,000 miles away, or from inside your own head. So she wrote, "I'm coming home. Not for good, but I've got leave coming, and I'm taking it. And we'll take the wall down together, and you'll teach me the taking down, like you taught me the building up. And I'll do exactly what you say, and I won't rush it." She wrote, "I've been slow to write because I didn't want it to be true that you're getting old. That's my fault, and I'm sorry for it." She wrote, "Everything I am good at because of you, and I should have told you that a long time ago." And she folded it and put it in an envelope, and walked it to the mail point herself before she could take it back. And it was the bravest thing she did that week, and there wasn't a soul around to see it. Vane came to find her 3 days after that, and it cost him more than the shot had cost her. She was cleaning her rifle, of course, on the same ammo crate, when he came across the yard. He stood there for a while, not saying anything, a loud man with no volume left in him. And then he sat down on the crate across from her, uninvited, and looked at his own hands. "I put my name on that board by the door 6 weeks ago and made sure you saw it," he said. "I called you a slot filler in a room where I knew it'd get back to you. I stood up in front of the whole formation and made you shoot a cold plate so I could call it lucky when you hit it." He stopped, started again, lower. "I did that because you were quiet and small, and you didn't fight me for any of the space I'd take up, and I decided that meant there was nothing to you. And then you made a shot I couldn't have made, blind, at a target you reasoned out over a radio. I've been shooting my whole life, and I have never once done anything like what you did on that horn. And I've spent 3 days trying to find a way to tell myself it was luck. And I can't, because I watched the tracer." He made himself look at her. "I was wrong about you in front of 400 people, and I owe you the same size of apology in front of them. And I'll give it. I'll stand up at formation and give it. But I wanted to give you the real one first, in private, where I can't hide behind making a show of it. I'm sorry, Poole. I was a loud fool, and you were the best of us the whole time, and I couldn't see past the quiet." Dana set the bore brush down. She looked at him for a moment, and what she said was not forgiveness, and it was not punishment. It was 3 words: straighten the board. He didn't understand at first. Then he did. The board by the door, his records, hung crooked, the one she'd leveled with 2 fingers on her way out the first day. He nodded once, slow, and something in his face came apart and put itself back together as a better thing. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, I'll straighten the board." A letter reached her from Draper's family before Draper was even off the outpost. His wife had written it, a woman named Carol Draper she'd never met, and it came up on the resupply bird in an envelope with a child's drawing folded inside it. And Carol Draper didn't know a single word of military and didn't try to use any. The letter said, "They told me Saul was in a fire, and a woman went in and carried him out. I don't know how to say this, so I'm just going to say it. I have been married to that man for 22 years, and I was going to have to raise our life without him, and now I'm not. My daughter drew you a picture. She doesn't know what you look like, so she drew you big, because that's how she thinks of you. Thank you for my husband. Thank you. I don't have anything else. Thank you. And Dana Poole, who could make a shot at 1,400 meters with a flat pulse, sat down on the ammo crate holding a child's crayon drawing of a woman drawn 10 feet tall and did not know what to do with her face. She'd taken the letter and read it, standing up, and had to sit down halfway through. She held it, and she held the drawing, and she cried, finally, out loud, in the open yard. And Ruiz saw her and didn't come over, because some things a person has to do by themselves. And Ruiz understood that now, in a way she hadn't 6 weeks ago. They gave her the medal in the mess hall at Kiel, and the whole thing was the room, not her. She barely moved through the whole of it. She stood at the front in a clean uniform, with her hands at her sides, and let it happen to her, and it was the 400 faces that carried it. Colonel Hale read the citation, and when he got to the part about the shot she never saw, and the covered approach that collapsed, his voice caught the way it had caught in the operations room, and he stopped and gathered himself in front of everyone rather than rush past it. And then the thing happened that the room came for. Marcus Vane, in the second row, stood up first. He came to attention before anybody else moved. He was sharp, and it cost him everything he had left, and everybody in that room knew exactly what it cost him, because they'd all heard him for 6 weeks, and now they watched him stand up straight for the woman he'd called a slot filler. And when the loudest man on the outpost stood up first, the rest of the room came up after him like a wave. 400 men to their feet in a plywood mess hall, and the sound of the benches scraping back all at once was the loudest thing on that hill since the day the ditch went quiet. Kessler, the supply sergeant, couldn't look at the front of the room. He stood with everybody else, but he looked at the floor, because he'd been the one on the other end of the radio. He'd been the one who told her about the cylinders, and he knew he'd handed her the piece, and she'd made the shot, and it was too big for him, and he looked at the floor and let it be too big. Ruiz couldn't look away. Ruiz stared at Dana Poole with her whole heart in her face and didn't blink. And Dana stood there and let 400 men stand up for her and barely moved. And the only thing she did was find Vane's eyes across the room, and she gave him one small nod, and he gave it back. Ruiz was the one who finally put it into words, out on the wall that night, the plainest words anybody said the whole time. She was on watch, and Dana came up to stand with her, and the two of them looked out at the dark valley where the motor pool had burned, and Ruiz was quiet for a long time. She'd been the one who watched Dana straighten a board on the first day, and hadn't known why it stuck. She'd been the one who drove the truck up the goat track and down it. And now she said the thing she hadn't been able to say 6 weeks ago, because she hadn't had the words yet. "I watched you that first day straighten that board on the wall," Ruiz said, "and I couldn't figure out why I kept thinking about it. A person straightening a board." She kept her eyes on the dark. "I get it now. You don't force anything. Not a board, not a stack of cans, not a beam, not a shot. You must find where the thing already wants to go, and you let it. The whole time, everybody was yelling about what you couldn't do. You were the only one in this whole place not fighting anything." She shook her head. "I want to be like that. I don't know how you learn it." You hand somebody rocks for 20 summers, Dana said, and one day you stop rushing. Months later, in a different season, the wall behind an old man's house, in a green country a long way from that brown valley, came down one stone at a time, and it came down right. Donna was home on leave, and the two of them worked the wall the way they'd built walls her whole childhood, except now it was her hands doing most of the work and his voice doing the teaching. Her grandfather in a chair beside the wall with a blanket over his knees and his shaking hands folded in his lap, telling her which stone was carrying the load and how to take the weight off it slow. And she did exactly what he said, and she didn't rush it once. When they got to the last of it, the big foundation stones, she set the pry bar under the load, the same way she'd set a pipe under a beam in a burning bay, close to the weight, letting the lever do what her back couldn't. And the old man watched her do it and said, "You've got it. You never force it. You find where it wants to go." And she said, "I know. You told me 100 times." And he said, "You never listened." And she said, "I listened every time." And the two of them laughed out loud in the green afternoon. Draper finished his boat that spring. She got a photograph of it in the mail. A wooden boat, 11 years in a garage, finally in the water, and sold Draper standing in it, grinning with a cane in one hand. And on the back of the photo, in a woman's handwriting, it said, "He says to tell you it floats." Ruiz made sergeant and put in for sniper school, and she wrote Donna a letter about it that was mostly questions. And Donna wrote back one line, "Don't force it." The thing the fire left her, she never named and never explained. But it was there. When she came in out of the bright afternoon into the dim of her grandfather's kitchen, there was a half-second now where she couldn't see, where the light took too long to come back, where the world stayed dark longer than it should have. The smoke had done something to her eyes that didn't fully heal, and every time she stepped from light into dark, she stood still for that half-second and waited for the room to arrive, the way you wait for a shot you can't see the end of. She never mentioned it. She just waited it out every time and let her eyes find where they already wanted to go. She went back when her leave was up, back to a fire base in a brown valley, a different one, the same kind. And there is a board on the wall by the door of the ready room there, a plywood board where they keep the range records in grease pencil, and it hangs level and square, because the first thing Dana Poole did when she walked in was reach up and straighten it with 2 fingers, and after that, nobody ever let it hang crooked again. That was the thing she left, not the medal, which sat in a drawer, not the story, which got told wrong more than it got told right. Just a rule that nobody wrote down and everybody followed, on a board she'd never put her own name on. You keep it level, and you don't force anything, and you find where the thing already wants to go. She was walking back to the ready room in the last of the light, level-eyed, at peace, her rifle over her shoulder and her hands steady, and the wind was coming up the valley the way it always came, and she read it without thinking, and she let it be.